Greetings, my name is Robin Hicks and I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Graduate Studies, and it's my great pleasure to introduce today's Dean's Lecture Series speaker. I'd like to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the university stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationship with the land continue to this day. Today's speaker is Kate Gower, a Master of Law candidate from the Faculty of Law. Kate holds a Bachelor of Science honors degree and a Juris Doctor degree, both from UVic, and while at UVic, she was a proud member of the UVic women's rowing team. She also holds a Master of Arts in Journalism from Western University. She's currently pursuing graduate studies at UVic to illuminate new possibilities for improving justice in BC. She also works as a lawyer for Aboriginal clients and is a champion for improving access to justice. Kate will be delivering what I'm sure will be an engaging lecture titled Better Justice: How Data Scientists and Legal Scholars Are Collaborating to Help Canadians Solve Their Everyday Legal Problems.
Imagine you break your arm. Do you know what to do? I think you do. I think you know some first aid. You know that you maybe need to get to the emergency room. You know you need to see a doctor. Now imagine that you have a legal problem. Do you know what to do? Do you have an idea of what to do next? The research shows that most of us don't. You may not even know that you have a legal problem. The research shows that 1 in 5 of you might go to a lawyer, and less than that will appear in the formal justice system as a way of resolving their problem. And this is a problem that we call an access to justice problem. And I'm borrowing that metaphor and that story about breaking your arm from Dr. Andrew Pillier. He's another professor in BC that works on access to justice issues. And I'm using it because I just think it illuminates the challenge and the problem, the access to justice problem, so well. When we consider the problem, we might ask ourselves, why don't we know where to go? Why don't we know where to go when we have a legal problem? And where do we end up going? And what happens when we get there? What's the experience like? And it turns out we don't know very much about that, and that makes it hard to get better. My name is Kate Gower, and my research focuses on exactly that place where we don't have information. My research focuses on gathering evidence on where people go and what they need to solve their legal problems. And our goal is to illuminate places where people need help so that we can focus our energies in the access to justice world on making improvements that will help the most people. My research is part of a lab that is working to do better, the Better Justice Lab. The idea behind the Better Justice Lab is that lawyers will work with people from other disciplines to create better justice. In a way, it's like a mashup between lawyers and data scientists, programmers, designers, and business people. Now, the lab has 2 parts. One part is actual teams of creative designers, computer programmers, business minds who come up with actual prototype solutions to problems that people face. We call them the rapid response teams, and they're groups of university students, and they do that work in a term structure. But those prototyping teams, they need to know what projects to work on, what problems to address, and that's where my work comes in. I'm working on the other part, and that's the research engine. And our job is to find ways to collect and analyze data and information and user experience to identify problems. And here's a slide that might help you understand or give you a bit of a visual. This is the slide about the Better Justice Lab, and it shows these 2 parts as images. The research engine looking a bit like a very high-tech way of getting tennis balls towards you as you stand on the other side of the tennis court. So it's a place where we work our way through the information and come up with an idea. And then that idea moves as a ball over to the machine, which is what we think of the rapid response team, with these different disciplines working to come up with a potential solution. So my goal as the person who's leading the research engine is to come up with ideas and show our prototyping teams where to work and where to focus their energy to help the most people. And we've come up with a research question to shape our work, which is, can we use data and user experience about people looking for legal help to make evidence-based decisions on what access to justice problems to work on first? That's a nice, big, juicy research question, because our goal then is, with the research engine, is to show and point those prototyping teams towards projects where they can work and focus their energy to help the most people. So this presentation is going to have 4 parts. I'm going to begin by sharing some information on access to justice research generally, on what we know and what we want to know. And then I'm going to move into talking about our research, the Better Justice Research Lab, and why it's different. And I'm going to give you a clue. It's because lawyers are collaborating with data scientists in new ways. Well, actually, we've never done it before. So the whole thing is new. And also because we're choosing to use publicly available data on the internet, Reddit forums, etc., to find out where people are going and what their problems are. That's part 2. In part 3, I'll take you through our methodology, and it's, on the outside, a fairly simple scientific plan. We're going to collect evidence, we're going to assemble it, and we're going to analyze it and then report out. But I'm going to get into some details because every part of that has been an experiment in this lab. And I'll close out with a discussion about where we're going next and some other ideas that I'm hoping might interest you. So first, as I said, what information do we have in access to justice research? At the moment, the dominant source of information comes out of these everyday legal needs research surveys. So these are done by phone, where a lot of people are called and ask a series of questions to try to illuminate what everyday legal problems they have. And what's come out of that is some solid information about the depth and the scope of the problem. So what's come out of the data is that in any 3-year period, nearly half of the people in Canada will have a legal problem. And then we say to ourselves, well, how are they doing? And again, the data tells us that in that 3-year period, just over half will resolve their problem, but just under half won't. In a 3-year period, they won't be able to resolve their legal problem. And we also know from the data that legal problems cascade into other social problems. So they begin to thicken and bleed into other parts of your life. And that's not good enough. And that's what we call an access to justice problem. And that's where we want to help and let you know that you're not on your own, that there are some legal processes, maybe some laws, maybe some court decisions that have dealt with your problem before and can help you solve your problem in a just way, a fair and just solution to your problem. Let me tell you a little bit more about these everyday legal needs surveys. What they're doing is they've coined this term, the everyday legal problem, and they've defined it as a thing, a problem that comes up in the normal activities of a person's daily life that has a legal aspect and a potential legal solution. But the point here is that I like is that many people don't know there's a legal aspect to their problem, and that doesn't matter when we're looking at everyday legal problems. And indeed, that problem may be sensibly dealt with outside of the justice system. That's fine too. What matters is that these problems are important and there is some element of the law that may be able to help them get a fair and just solution. Now, some people have very strong opinions about this definition. I'm using it in our research because that's the research that's quoted in the everyday legal needs surveys. And let me just show you a little bit about those everyday legal needs surveys and how they got to Canada and BC. So it was Hazel Genn in the 1999 book, Paths to Justice, who did this landmark survey in the United Kingdom with this new approach of asking questions of people to illuminate problems they were having that raised a civil, and that's a person-to-person legal problem, as opposed to a criminal problem, which is a criminal issue, which is when it's as against the state, you've done something that the state deems unacceptable. So civil problems between people. Neighbor, your tree is too close to my property and it shouldn't be there, civil problem. So she was asking questions about that and whether or not it was recognized as a legal problem by the person experiencing and whether or not they were actually dealing with it in the formal justice system. And people thought this was a fantastic approach, and indeed it got picked up by a wonderful person here in Canada called Ab Curry, who did a series of surveys here in Canada, the legal problems of everyday life. And eventually he started to work with Trevor Farrow and others, and that's the second book you see in the picture beside me, The Justice Crisis. And that actually just came out in 2020. And that's reporting predominantly on some surveys they did in 2013 and 2014. So that's Canada-wide. But then closer to me here is Legal Aid BC. So now we're in BC specifically. And this is actually, from my point of view, a really lovely set of data because Legal Aid BC had the foresight to do a series of surveys every 5 years. So they started in 2008. Then they did it again in 2013 and again in 2018. And from a perspective of research, to have that steady checking in on the same questions, different people, but the same questions to get the temperature of what's happening in BC, so you can start to see trends, that's gold, right? We love that stuff. And they also did a COVID-specific survey, and that's what you see them referring to in the slide that's included on this slide I'm giving you on the Legal Aid BC Everyday Legal Needs, the 2020 survey. So Curry is working with Faro, and they're getting some research from these surveys they did in 2013, 2014. And here is what they find in terms of Canadians' everyday legal problems. The top 3 problems that come out of this survey are consumer issues, debt, and employment. And this is a huge eye-opener for me, because I'm a practicing lawyer, and it never occurred to me that consumer legal issues would be so high in people's lives. So this was a really good catch for me. I know people who work in employment law, I know people who work in family law, which are further down, but I don't know any lawyers, and I don't think there are any lawyers who work in consumer law, or I don't know that there is consumer law, and that's okay. This is exactly the kind of evidence and information we need to start collecting. So people really leaned into this. And we see that this sort of return repeats in survey after survey. So for example, I talked to you about the Legal Aid BC survey, and their top problems are consumer, employment, and debt. So that's a little bit of a flip, right? Employment came up over debt, and their next one is housing. And they found that there's more people reporting problems. Now, I have to tell you that when Legal Aid BC does a survey, it's particularly targeting information about low-income BC people. So that may be a factor in their numbers, right? Their goal is to better understand the legal problems of low-income British Columbians. In the Better Justice Lab, our goal is to help the most people. And so when I look at this data, I think to myself, if I focus on those areas, I'm going to be helping the most people. But that's where we run into a problem, because the data has also shown us that most people are resolving their problems outside of the formal justice system. So how do we get data? How do we get information on how those people are resolving their problems and what they're doing? Because the data shows us that only 1 in 10 are appearing before courts and tribunals, and only 2 in 10 are talking to lawyers. And what we're running into is that we have a real data deficit in law. We have a history of not collecting a lot of information about how we're doing. It's endemic across all areas of law. We have very little information on what people need, what problems they have, where they go. And it's not just me talking about this. This data deficit makes it hard to make evidence-based decisions. And there's a group here in BC that I want to introduce you to, which is called Access to Justice BC. And it's actually advocating to be a catalyst for action and encourage a culture shift in the justice system. So it's seeking to create an environment where change will happen, and it's asking all of us involved in the legal system to make some very fundamental shifts. And the first one is user-centered. So it's asking us to move away from thinking of the courts as the center of the justice system to thinking about the users who use that system. That's a pretty fundamental shift. It's asking us to move away from trying to figure out how we can do better in a silo, in just us thinking about us, to collaborating with other people who have other thoughts. It's asking us to recognize that we as a group are very risk averse. And that's fine, right? We're trained to be risk averse. We're trained to find risk and stamp it out as legal people. But now we're being asked to open ourselves to experiment and innovate as we try to improve the justice system. And finally, we're being asked to make evidence-based choices about where to put our energy. And so we have a history of people coming up with ideas that we then follow. And there's actually a really lovely story about this. In the UK, there was a Lord someone or other, we don't need to know his name, but he was at one of these sessions, and he was talking about ways to improve justice. And he said, I think I've had a rather good idea about something that could really improve the justice system. And somebody said to him, well, Lord somebody or other, that is a very good idea. Upon what basis, what evidence do you have that this will help, and this will help a lot of people? And Lord somebody or other got the joke, right? He saw what was happening, and he said, rather tongue-in-cheek, well, do you know, he said, when one has an idea, one rather assumes that it's a good one. And you see, I love that story, but it is actually a nice window into thinking that can lead you astray, or the thinking we want to shift away from. We want to find data and use evidence to show us where to put our work now. And that's what my work is about right now. And that's what I love about it. That's what the research engine is doing. It's new work, it's innovative, and it's important. How do we figure out how to help people who aren't in the formal justice system? We have to figure out where they're going when they look for help. And so I'm going to take you right into the second part of my 4 parts, which is our work at the Better Justice Research Engine. What makes us different and new? And our plan was to use the data and surveys that are already out there, so not to be doing a new survey. And I'm just going to cut to the chase and tell you that our hypothesis now is that we can use data science and legal experience, and using those, we can collect, aggregate, and analyze publicly available data that's already sitting out there on the internet to tell us what problems to work on first. I'm going to put that in a screen for you. You're going to see that written down, so don't feel you have to scribble it down if that's what you're doing. But I just had to tell you where we shaped our hypothesis. And let me tell you how we got there, because we were going to use those everyday legal needs surveys that I just introduced you to, right? They were ready, they were available, they had lots of interesting information. But our first learning in this whole process was that that wasn't going to work. So our first learning was that the data for surveys were just not that easy to get. They have value for the people that did them. It took a lot of time to get them. There were various reasons it was hard to get them. And as we waited for them, we started considering them and considering what they imported to our research and what their limitations were. So I mentioned a moment ago that when Legal Aid BC did its research, it weighted it to give information on low-income people in BC. And so that would affect the research we did if we brought that data in and based our research on it. And finally, as we looked at the data, we realized it was telling us what to do. Because those surveys actually showed us the other option. Those surveys came back, and when they tried to ask people, where do you go? 33% of people said, we go to the internet. Of course, that survey didn't go any further, and so it was left like an open question. It was almost a door telling us, go through this door. Well, that's how we saw it. And we also saw that that data was from 2013, 2014, and so our instinct was that there was going to be more of that. And so we went looking for the data online. And the first thing we did was we started to say, where do Canadians look for legal advice online? And it turns out you can do this using Google Statistics, right? You can search using programs like Google Trends and SEMrush, and you can find out what happens when people search for legal advice. What do they do next? And if you look there at the screen, you'll see that the top one is that people go to Reddit. They go to Reddit, they ask the community for help. And doing this bit of research showed us another resource we didn't even really know about at the time, which was Legalline, which is actually very Ontario-based. And you can see then by the numbers, then it goes various resources in Ontario, and then interestingly, the most people that are looking for work are looking for things in BC. So we had this, so we jumped over to Reddit, and this is where things got exciting for us, because we found a Reddit forum called Legal Advice Canada. And what we found was, even as we found it and as we started our work, the number of people posting, the post numbers are going up, and it's really beginning to look like an exponential curve, right? And we've just been through COVID, and we've listened to Dr. Bonnie Henry, and now we know what exponential curves mean. What it means for us, so come back out of COVID for a moment, come back to me with my data, it's a good thing for us because it means lots of data and information to work with. So we've gone from a situation where we didn't have any data to a situation where we found the place that data is growing exponentially. And that is so exciting for us. So we reviewed what we'd found and what we'd spotted in the limitations of these legal surveys. We huddled, our little team, and then we made the pivot. Okay, so this was actually a moment in the whole project where we had to say, and we had to discuss it with the board and get approval, that we had an assumption coming into this work that we would be able to use these legal surveys. We had to make a call that that's not going to happen in the timeline for this research. So that could have been the worst thing that ever happened. But instead, we had located this new data source, the internet. And it was full of data. And it was full of information because people are going there and looking for help and asking questions in public forums. More than that, it's constantly accumulating. So it's getting bigger. More than that, it's organically accumulating. There's no questions that people have to answer. It's people actually showing up and asking for what they need. It's a free form. It's full of emotion. And these are things that I watched my data scientists who were involved at the time, Juan Rosell and Shonak Mondal, get very excited, because this is the stuff, this is the cutting edge of data science. This is where you're dealing with artificial intelligence, natural language processing, so that means how we speak, what we write, definitely not formatted data. So they got very excited. And it was that collaboration with data scientists that was even making this possible in the first place. So it was very exciting for me. And it led to the new hypothesis that we developed, which I mentioned to you off the top, and here it is in writing. Our hypothesis is that using data science and legal experience, we can collect, aggregate, and analyze publicly available data on the internet to tell us what problems to address first. Now, I accept the very nature of the Reddit data itself can have problems and challenges and considerations, but by gosh, it has opportunity as well. Jumping forward into methodology, right? This is the third part of my 4 parts. And I told you that we are following a fairly simple, on the outside, scientific approach of collecting our information, assembling it, aggregating it in one place, analyzing it, and then reporting out. And I want to give you a heads up, though, that every stage of this has been an experiment. It's been new. So the first step, for example, collecting. Now, I told you about how we thought we were going to use the everyday legal needs surveys, but now we're very focused on what I have there as source 1, which is Reddit, the Reddit data. But we know about these other sources. So we're going to build our idea out as a proof of concept using Reddit, but our goal is to be able to plug and play with these other sources. So in different terms, other data scientists will come in and build a way to bring Twitter into our universe, build a way to bring Quora into our universe, and build a way to bring People's Law School in, which is another nice little story about data, because they actually have a little chatbot running on their website called Beagle, which is adorable. And I'm very curious to bring in that free flow of conversation about people's legal problems. So compare that to how people ask questions in Reddit. But that's, again, I got to put that in the future bucket, because right now, the project is for the data scientists to keep writing programs that collect the Reddit data, scrape the Reddit data, if you've heard that word. And we want to do it on a regular schedule, and we want to make it BC specific. Now, there's a key point, because Reddit is national, and we need to find a way of making sure we're pulling data for BC, because that's our focus in this project. We bring the data back, and now we want to aggregate it in one place. And I've given you a picture of a lake, because I think it's lovely, and because it turns out, and this was a great eye-opener for me, that we don't need to use the old database formats anymore. It used to be databases needed very structured data in columns and rows. But now we've advanced to the place where we've got databases that can take data in a less structured format, indeed in an unstructured format. It can be any writing. It can be the data from people writing into Reddit. It can be PDF reports. It can be the questions and answers from chatbots like the Beagle. And they can all come together in what's called a data lake. And I find that a lovely image. I find the image of the data sort of floating around in it, waiting for us to go in and write programs that will find the relationships and find the connections between them. And I didn't know about this when I started. Again, the value of collaboration was that I was able to put that out there to my data scientists, Shonak and Juan at the beginning, and then Echo Zhang, who joined us later, and asked them, please recommend the best way to store data. And they recommended something called a Postgresql database. So that is a database that can take in unstructured data. Postgres is the database, and SQL stands for Structured Query Language. SQL. And that's the program that allows us to work with our data. So that's the program that allows us to analyze the relationships and patterns across different data. For example, we can write a little program that will go in and query the data, ask the data, in these 10,000 posts we just brought back from Reddit, which ones are from BC? So that's the kind of analysis we start being able to do, and that's what's called mining the data, or text mining, which is natural language processing, a form of artificial intelligence, and boom, there, I just slipped in your first data science lecture, just a short data science lecture there that you can walk out and bring out at the dinner table. And I'm going to, now that you know that little bit of data science, I'm just going to move right into our data. I'm going to, with the analysis part of my discussion, which is coming up now, I'm going to take you right into the data we're actually using live and show you some of our first analysis work. When we jump into the data and we see it on a display, it looks like this. This is one of our early displays of some of our early analysis, and we're very excited about it. Let me introduce you to it. What you see on this screen is 5 topic clusters. And what's happened here is the program has gone off and it's looked at all 10,000 posts, or however many we have in our data lake now. And it's looked at all those words, and it's identified that they start to coalesce and cluster together in what it's going to call topics. It's found 5. The fact that they're far apart means they're quite distinct from each other. The smaller they are means the more densely clustered they are, the more it can really feel a topic is coalescing out of all those words. And as I click on them, it does another thing that I really like. So I click on number 4, and over here it gives me the top 30 most relevant words. It thinks of them as terms in topic 4. Landlord, rent, lease, tenant, deposit. And let's just play for a minute. What happens when we click on these? So we click on landlord, and look at that. It gives us more information. It tells us that landlord is mostly, in fact, only showing up in topic 4. But if we come down to rent, oh, look at that. Rent is showing up in mostly 4, but also 3 and 2. What about lease? Again, only in this 4th cluster. Tenant, showing up in 4 and 1, and deposit is again showing up in more than one cluster. So, I mean, to me, this is already fun. And what has this program done? Well, let me just explain what it's actually done in terms of its actual thinking. It's gone off and it's analyzed the data using something called latent Dirichlet allocation, or LDA. That's a topic modeling tool written to think about documents in a certain way. And what it does is it goes off and it starts finding words that repeat. It starts discovering topics that are actually latent in the data set. They're just sitting there waiting to be discovered. Now, I couldn't find them because it would mean going through tens of thousands of Reddit posts, but the program can do that very quickly. So it goes through unsupervised, so it's an unsupervised program. It goes off and does this all on its own. It can do big data, like I just said. It can go off and review all our Reddit posts, right up to however many we get. And another thing is it doesn't mind if a term shows up in more than one cluster. And I just showed you that. And that's got a nice name. That's called a fuzzy cluster. Isn't that charming? So it doesn't mind if the clusters are fuzzy. And how we're looking at it now on this screen, and it does say this up in the top here, is the Intertopic Distance Map. And this is another program that we're using. Just because when the LDA program runs, it creates many dimensions of thought because it can do that, because it's a computer program. But that's not something the human brain can really come to grips with. So the Intertopic Distance Map just takes all that data and analysis that LDA has done and turns it into a 2-dimensional space so that it's something that we can more conceive with our human brains, right? A reasonable number of dimensions, like say 2. Right? So this now we can have the fun, well, certainly the fun I was having, and I hope you were having it with me. And ta-da! I just gave you your data science lesson number 2, because what I've just described, again, is very simple artificial intelligence. That is unsupervised machine learning. And this is very powerful. It's come up with these results for us. But there's also limits to what it can do. And this is a nice story I had, is my data scientist came back to me and showed me this, and I was all agog. But they said to me, we have no idea what these clusters are, right? They don't specialize in law. None of these issues maybe were relevant to them. Certainly the program has no life of its own. So it just sees these words as terms. They have no meanings for it. And that's when we need the legal experience, or what we call the domain expertise, to be a part of it. So that's me, a lawyer, another legal mind we brought in, Caitlin Cumming. And we are the ones who go through and we notice these words. And I'm going to click on them again to show you landlord, for example, rent, lease, tenant, and deposit. And we know that these words have something to do with housing issues. And because we work in law in BC, we immediately start thinking of the Residential Tenancy Act and housing issues. And so we can connect this research to the real world of legal issues in BC. And let me give you another example. What if we click on section cluster 5, for example? Now here's a completely different set of words jump to the top. Car, vehicle, insurance, credit, and card. And again, because of my domain expertise, I might look a little further down, here's ICBC, and because I grew up in BC and I have a car in BC, I know that that's a huge area where people have issues, and so I begin to think to myself, this has got something to do with vehicles, with insurance, with ICBC, right? So now I've got an idea about what clusters 4 and 5 are about. So there's clusters that make sense, and then as I said, there's others that don't. So, but let's go over here to cluster 3. Again, this one's got some fairly clear words in it: contract, employer, manager, employee, employment. So for me, again, as a lawyer, I started thinking this is about employment issues, right? This is about employment law. And I come down to section 4, and I get child, parent, mom, father, school. I begin to think this is something to do with family issues. And then just for comparison, we go over to section 1, and you see an example where this cluster doesn't instinctively make a lot of sense for me, right? Property, dog, police, cost, lot, small. So here's an example of a time when a cluster pulls a bunch of words together, but it's difficult to see right off the top what information it's showing me. So again, just at a soft look, without doing a deep dive into it, we feel like we're seeing clusters for housing. Something to do with cars and insurance, something to do with employment, and something to do with family. And if we just step back for a moment, and if you can just cast your mind back to when I showed you that slide from that Everyday Legal Needs Survey from Professor Trevor Farrow and Ab Curry and that team's research. Do you remember what those top issues were? They were consumer, debt, and employment. And I find that very interesting, that the clusters that are forming for us are not the same as what led the conversation in Farrow and Curry's research. Now, we're measuring slightly different things, and I accept that, right? They were measuring what were the top issues. We're looking at what's bubbling up out of the data really clearly. But I impress upon you that for us, this starts to become very interesting, because we can start to have a conversation about why did that crop up, and why did that crop up in Farrow, why is this cropping up here? And so we're getting into the cool things about this work, right? The cool things that I'm getting very excited about. One is this point about how we can think about how this work relates to everyday legal needs surveys. But if we just talk about what we're seeing right in front of us, I just love that these clusters are created by people showing up on Reddit, just asking the question that's on the top of their mind. And these are the access to justice problems that people are facing. They're bubbling up for us. It's an inductive approach to how we help people. Let's look at the data, let the issues bubble up, and then go forth and see what we can do to help them. And I find that tremendously exciting. We could run, I also want to point out that because we do these draws on Reddit on a regular basis, we can actually run this analysis, say every 2 weeks. And that means we start to see the patterns. We start to see what's bubbling up more. Maybe something happens, COVID, and suddenly a surge in a certain type of question, and we can watch it happen live. Now I think that's really exciting information to have so that we can help people better. And this was one of our first clusters, the one I'm showing you here right now. And the other part that comes from this is a great piece of data science applied to some information about people's legal problems. It's only a few versions. I'm really looking forward to working with more data scientists and having them suggest other ways of doing the analysis. I'm also looking forward to working with other people with the domain expertise that I have to go through the actual Reddit posts. So now let's check our data science. Let's pull the Reddit posts and actually look at what people are asking for and see if we can identify hot spots that we can help with that way too. But so what? I'm trying to lead you to the point of so what? Why is this important? Because now we get to the part where we're reporting out, and what are we reporting out? I'm going to take you back to my slideshow. So I've talked you through some of our analysis, and now we need to report it out. So you have to remember again that we're within the Better Justice Lab program, and that it has two parts, right? So the other part, so I've talked you through with the data engine in our early work, but the other part are these rapid response teams, these teams that don't include any lawyers, but instead includes designers, computer programmers, and business people who want to come up with a prototype solution to a problem. And our job at the research engine is to identify things for them to work on. And I think you might be able to see, and I'm certainly happy to share with you, that the engine is not exactly at that place yet, and that's okay. That's okay, because we're going to get there. And so at this stage, what's happening is I'm taking these areas that are bubbling up and I'm using my connections to connect with people in the legal community, indeed connect with community groups, because they are bringing that user experience into my data, into my lab, as it were. So they can tell me about the user experience users are having when they show up asking for help in, say, housing. So there can be a conversation, for example, where people are showing up at a community legal outreach situation and they're looking for help with, for example, a housing issue. And so I've arrived there asking about housing issues because the data has brought me here. And now I'm going to add this user experience element to see if I can find a project for one of our rapid response teams to work on. And what gets reported over and over again is that a user is arriving at these clinics looking for help and they're already in a very high state of stress. They have had a series of things happen that they want to share, that they need to get off their chest, that they need to process. But on the other side is this group that wants to offer help and legal support. They want to onboard these users and bring them into this system with compassion and attention to detail, but they also have time restraints. So they also need to be able to do it with a certain amount of speed. And I thought, aha, now we have identified a sticking point, a place where I feel a rapid response team could produce something really well designed that could fit in this place and could perhaps calm users and improve their experience of accessing justice. It could make them better prepared as they approach a community user group to get that support with their everyday legal needs issues, right? And I'm not going to say what that is because that's not my job. My job is to lob this bouncing ball to this rapid response team who will come up with something that will fill that space. And so I'm waiting to see what they come back with as I go back to my job of finding more opportunities through data and research. Now, I would have some questions and ideas that I would want to share with me if we were face to face. And we're not face to face in this environment. So I'm going to move to the discussion section, right? And I'm going to open up 4 points that I think are really on the top of my mind. And please contact me if you have any other thoughts that you think would be really relevant for this, because I'd be very interested to hear them. So let me bring up 4 points that I think are really worth leaning into and discussing a bit in this space of the research engine for the Better Justice Lab. So the first thing I want to point out is that what we've been doing up till now is building out the proof of concept, just proving that we can do this, right? So proving that we can go through these steps, collect Reddit data, aggregate it in a data lake, analyze it, and report out and direct the rapid response teams on where to go. But my actual goal at the end there is we report out, and the one other thing that I want to prove is that we can actually have a website which is live, which we can look at for where people are looking for legal help and looking for help with their everyday legal problems, but also where the rapid response teams could go to look for data to support their work. Because data is power in this world, and we want to be able to share what we're bringing back and aggregating. Indeed, I want to make that open to you. I want you to be able to go to our website and see where people are looking for help with their everyday legal needs, and maybe even see what kind of answers they're getting. So there's all kinds of things we could do there. And once we have that proof of concept built, what we want to do is thicken the work. So we want to collect more online sources. I told you we're starting with Reddit, but we want to plug and play with those other sources I told you about. We want to aggregate more stuff. We want to fill up that lake, right? We want to have regular updates that are independently going and bringing that data back to us. It means that we've gone from a place where we had no data, or a very much an endemic problem of a total lack of data in the law world, to being completely data rich. And this is actually happening, and other people are noticing this. So I just want to show you this story from the New York Times, which I thought was great, which is Reddit is America's unofficial unemployment hotline. And so it's a lovely visual way and a discussion about how, just like I said off the top, people are going online. Where are they going? Reddit. So it gives me comfort, makes me feel we're in the right place. We want to do more analysis, right? So that's our third part of the research. We want to keep collaborating with data scientists on new ways to collect and analyze. We want to be experimental in how we do these algorithms and what we can learn from them. And we want to stay data-driven. We want to stick with this inductive approach of letting these ideas bubble up and show us where we should work. right? Where we should direct people to put energy to improve this access to justice crisis we're having in Canada. Our overall goal, as my data scientists are always giving me great words to use, to develop a machine learning architecture, it sounds very grand, that uses a mix of these unsupervised techniques, which is what I showed you today, and supervised techniques to process the data and identify these access to justice hotspots. Now, the strength of this work from my perspective is that it is new. It is innovative, and it is just so necessary. And I just want to share with you that I love it, if you haven't picked that up already. And the reason I love it is that I really love and believe in improving processes. I do it almost instinctively. So I'm a practicing lawyer working in the Aboriginal law, working for Aboriginal people. And I started almost immediately by trying to improve the legal process. So I found myself in court wondering why we were using all this paper and trying to show and bring new tools into court so that we could perhaps work more efficiently and be in a paperless environment. And there's a whole story there. But now I have brought myself to working on this project. And I decided to work on this project because I strongly believe that it can help more people. It can help more users. We can help more of those people who are finding themselves in Reddit, or more of those people who have a legal problem, and unlike when they break their arm and know what to do, they have a legal problem and they just don't know what to do. I want to find ways to help. I'm looking for information for users so that it will direct us where to help, and this work is so new and innovative and necessary because we're actually finding data online, which is a complete turnaround from where we were before. It mashes up my skills, if you will, between being a lawyer and being interested in the data. And it also kind of pulls in my great love of building good teams as well, which I'll come to in a moment. So that was point number 2 I wanted to talk about. The interesting thing to discuss is me. Am I allowed to say that? But number 3, the thing I want to say is that this is very new for the justice system. And some people may look at some parts of this and think, well, maybe this isn't rocket science. But it is very new for the justice system, and we are using cutting-edge data science, like this idea of natural language processing. That's the cutting edge of data science. And what I love is, as I'm presenting this work, so that slide that I presented for you, or when I took you to see the data, and here's a picture of it now, right? I report this out to the board, or I report this out to the Chief Judge of BC, and I see them put their glasses on, and they lean forward into the screen. I mean, they're drawn to it. There's a real appetite for this information. And so I feel thrilled that that's how it's being received, and it makes me want to do more. The 4th thing I want to point out to you is just how innovative it is. And it's innovative because it's new data science, but it's also innovative because of this point of collaborating with data scientists and learning to collaborate with people with different skills. And we had a team, and in fact my favorite teams are teams where people bring really different skill sets and interests to the table. So in our team we had 3 data scientists, Shonak Mundell, Juan Rosell, and Echo Zhang, and we had 1 PhD law student, Caitlin Cummings, and there we were working together, and it became very obvious that we actually needed to take a moment and just shape our team. Just take a moment and say to ourselves, what would be the very best thing for this team to focus on this term? Because I wanted to get the best out of those people. And so we did. We ran a team building session, and we found ourselves focusing in on exactly what I have just shared with you. And I strongly believe that's why we got so far, because people were really invested in working on it, even though they brought really different skill sets. And I did have to laugh, because during the team building session, I honestly thought one after another that each one of them would quit for one reason or another. And instead they all came roaring back in with ideas. And the final piece to that is I can see that I'm going to have to lead those team building sessions every term. And that's going to be a lot of work, and it's going to pay off, because done well, it brings new and innovative work that people are excited about to the table. And because we're in a term schedule, it means we're going to do that every term. And that, to me, is also very exciting. So watch this space for what we uncover next. Let me say thank you. Thank you for watching this talk and taking the time to learn about research at UVic. We're thrilled to be part of the Dean's Lecture Series, and I look forward to reporting out to you with our next insights. Thank you.